Good morning today from Washington, D.C., and sorry for the slight delay. We were waiting for Tom Graham to join us, but unfortunately he hasn't so far appeared. So my colleague Katia Glod, Deputy Head of Foreign Policy, is available and will participate in a dialogue with me. But welcome nevertheless to the NEST Centre Midweek Briefing. Today, we're going to look at the significance of President Putin's marathon session at the Valdai Discussion Club at the weekend. The Valdai Discussion Club was founded in 2004. It describes its role as practical work aimed at shaping the global agenda and delivering a qualified and objective assessment of global political and economic issues. Interestingly, Putin has participated in the club's annual meeting every year since its establishment. Before the events of 2014 in Ukraine, there was a strong Western presence at the annual meetings, but this dropped off really very sharply in the years that followed. And since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, there's been barely any Western participation. This year, the conference theme was the polycentric world, instructions for use. And the Valdai Club's research team always publishes a report to accompany the annual meeting. And this year, it carried the unusual title of Dr. Chaos, or How to Stop Worrying and Love the Disorder. And it's a 30-page, largely theoretical piece arguing that the international system in its current transitional form is more stable than some people would suggest, not least because in the author's view, the global majority is open to cooperation and wishes to avoid confrontation. The report is available in Russian and English on the club's website. Putin's speech and the question and answer session that followed lasted in total nearly 4 hours. So there's possibly no reason to question Putin's stamina at this point. The leitmotif of his remarks was the rapidly changing nature of international affairs and the opportunities that this is creating for achieving Russia's goal of reformatting the international system to remove its Western imprint and to make it, in Putin's words, more democratic. And one might say that Putin preaches freedom in international affairs, but not at home in Russia. His speech was delivered with a degree of passion, and there can be no doubting his desire to at least radiate confidence that he will win the war in Ukraine quickly. Whether he truly believes this, of course, is another matter. But he did go out of his way to express contempt for what, in his view, Europe has become. And he repeated his regular denunciations of Western policy towards Ukraine. There was a warning, too, in particular for Germany, that Russia would respond to Chancellor Merz's determination to make the Bundeswehr Europe's strongest army. It was also clear that Putin has been stung by President Trump's reference to Russia as a paper tiger, perhaps in a similar way to how he was offended by President Obama's reference in 2014 to Russia as a regional power, and one that was threatening some of its immediate neighbors, not out of strength, in Obama's words, but weakness. So to discuss what Putin had to say and the current context, Katia Glod has kindly stepped in since Tom Graham is not with us. So Katia is my deputy, has a very strong background in analyzing Russia's role, particularly in the countries on its borders. So Katia, thanks very much for joining us at short notice. So let's start with Will Valdai, and we might move out from there. But what do you think the speech tells us about Putin's position on the war? Has anything at all changed? I mean, he seems to think that he just has to press a little bit harder, and Ukraine and its European allies will fold. And of course, he's playing for something that seems to be much bigger. But do you think anything has fundamentally changed?
Yes, hello, John. I'm delighted to step in for Tom Graham. It's a very interesting discussion. What Putin had said at the Valdai Forum. I think what struck me personally was that we did not really hear much new information. It was all about the narrative that we had heard him saying before about the polycentric world, about the multipolar order, about the fact that the war is with the West, not with Ukraine as such. Ukraine is as a proxy, obviously. Again, I think we heard very personal, warm tone to Trump, much harder tone to Europe, of course. Europe has become the scapegoat for everything. At the same time, he did signal to Washington his red lines about the new missile deliveries to Ukraine. So all in all, I wouldn't say that a lot has changed in Putin's rhetoric. At the same time, I had the impression that he felt really very confident, or at least made an impression that he is very confident militarily at the front line. He certainly continues to wants to continue the war. He certainly thinks he has the resolve, the resources to do that. And I think that was the mood and the message that he tried to convey to the public.
Yeah, I would go along with that. I mean, I was just struck by what one of our Russian colleagues sort of picked out, because it's always important, I think, to look at the body language and the way the words are delivered. That I also felt that Putin sounded really quite confident. Whether this is something that just a pose he has to adopt for the occasion, or whether he fundamentally believes it, we just don't know. But one of our Russian colleagues pointed out that they felt that he actually looked a little bit scared on stage compared to what he normally does. So again, sort of hard to know. But I mean, there's no escaping the fact he talks all the time about Russia having the strategic initiative on the front. He referred to the losses that Ukraine is taking, claimed falsely that these are much greater than Russia's. I mean, if they were much greater than Russia's, Ukraine would have lost the war by now. I mean, that's absolutely clear. He referred to the number of desertions on the Ukrainian side. And you just had the impression that, well, he believes all this is happening, but why then is the Russian army not achieving this, operational breakthrough and, in a position to defeat the Ukrainians? Yes, there are definitely problems on the Ukrainian side, and Russia is trying to exploit some of its weak points. They're pushing forward very hard now because there are really probably just a couple of weeks left before a lot of that ground becomes marshy and it becomes difficult for certain vehicles to move. So they're making a concerted push. But it looks very unlikely that they're going to achieve any sort of rapid breakthrough. So, here President Trump's words along the lines that Putin doesn't have much to show for 3.5 and there'll soon be 4 years of this war. I mean, he surely must be sort of touching a nerve there. And I was also struck by just what I felt was a small mistake that Putin made in the way he presented his arguments. He normally has a set of arguments that are, I think, carefully rehearsed, carefully lined up. And on this issue of the paper tiger, and this is where I think it touched him emotionally. He'd argued at one point that Russia was fighting NATO in Ukraine, and I think by saying that, he was claiming that's why we've not been able to achieve the progress that I had expected, because we're having to fight the whole of NATO. But then in the same breath, he mocked NATO by suggesting that NATO was a paper tiger. So there was definitely an inconsistency there, and that's not the sort of thing I believe he would sort of normally allow himself. But do you sense that there is some genuine confidence on his part, or do you think that he just has to adopt a pose?
It's obviously very hard to say. I would not go as far as our indeed Russian colleagues who said that he looked a bit frightened. He maybe lacked a little bit of confidence. That's possible, but it's we're going here away from political analysis, drifting away from political analysis and going more into, psychological sphere, which I would probably like to avoid. I think we look at his behavior rather than his actions rather than his appearance. I think that there hasn't been really anything new in the development of the so-called negotiations, and there seems to be obviously nothing that the US is willing to do at the moment to put that pressure on Putin to sit down at the negotiating table. At the same time, we know that Ukrainians also demonstrate resilience, as they always do, despite the high rise in their attacks. On the other hand, they have been rather successful in trying to destroy Russian refineries, and it's linked to that oil revenues. Of course, it's a very long process, but I think this is a new development that we're seeing. Obviously, hitting Ukrainian infrastructure is something that, again, comes up as a very concerning point this winter. So we'll have to see how Ukraine is dealing with this. But I would think that for the time being, again, Putin is probably more confident that he's just making him appear confident. I think his actions and what we have observed developments in the recent weeks and even months do not indicate that there is some negotiation or some thinking going on in his mind. And perhaps my last point is that he did again urge Ukrainians to negotiate, to sit at the table. And the fact that he's not doing that himself, I think, proves that indeed it's more rhetoric than actually his actual intent.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I don't know if you managed to read Tom Graham's interview with RBK that I think appeared last week. I mean, Tom's been arguing for some time, some months now, that Putin should declare peace because he's actually achieved his goals in Ukraine, and he implies by that well, first of all, Ukraine is not going to join NATO because of the position of the Trump administration. Secondly, it occupies a substantial part of Donbass, and Ukraine is not going to be able to, at least by military means, to reconquer that territory anytime soon. At some point, there are going to be elections in Ukraine, and President Zelensky has dropped a hint that he won't run again. So for those reasons, Tom believes that Putin should settle. And possibly the bizarre thing is that Trump really put that deal on the table almost for him back in the spring, but he seems determined to carry on. Now, I think it's difficult to argue with Tom on those sort of basic points. Where I think I depart company with him is on this issue of Ukraine's demilitarization, because he says that Ukraine's going to have to accept limits on the size of its armed forces, so that certain Russian security needs are satisfied. But why should Ukraine accept limits on its armed forces if there are no reciprocal limits from the Russian side? So you then have to talk about a bigger European arms control framework that, admittedly, Tom does refer to as being part of some sort of final settlement, if you like, of the Ukraine question. It's going to involve this bigger security architecture question. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we are here actually trying to put the finger on the core demands that Putin and Russia have for this war. What does really Putin want? Does he want just territory? Does he want Ukrainian territory, obviously? Does he want to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO? I believe that that's not his ultimate goal. I do think that for Putin, it's far more than that. It's ideological, civilizational choice of Ukraine. And I think, again, if we come back to the Valdai speech, that's something that also featured in the speech quite prominently when he was talking about Western norms and universal values that the West, in Putin's view, has tried to impose on the rest of the world for many decades. And now he was saying it's the time has come for other countries to decide on their own merits what they want to do. And I think that very much boils down and ties back to his core objectives in Ukraine. I think it's far from just accepting some of Ukrainian territory or establishing a demilitarized zone. I think for Putin, it would be very important for Ukraine not to move closer and further into its integration with the, well, first of all, with the European institutions like the European Union. And it would be very important for Putin also to keep Ukraine as the sort of gray zone, or let's put, even more bluntly, directly in the Russian orbit, and have the same oligarchic networks that control the country. It would be good for him from the resource points of view, but I think it would also be good for this Russian model of the state and this imperial thinking that is very much prevalent in Putin. So I do disagree and depart from Tom Graham at this point. And I, like many others, I guess, I'm not very appreciative of this analytical prism lens when we are talking in terms of, big powers and, big two countries like America or Russia can, decide the fate of other countries. And Ukraine is also not small. And if we talk about Russia's weight, what is it apart from, yes, great, labor force, it's educated people, it's big resources, but it has not really, I think, given to the world much. Other than that, of course, apart from, its culture, its literature, it has not really demonstrated that's good, those goods that it could deliver to the rest of the world. And why should it then decide on the fate of the other countries? So I think, therefore, this is one of the reasons why Putin is determined to carry on. He wants to impose this model, Russian model, on Ukraine, and Ukraine has been trying to escape that since, the very time that the Soviet Union broke up, and it has been doing that far more successfully since 2014, when many reforms have been implemented. And my last point, perhaps, on this, I think to some extent the example of Belarus in 2020 was a bit of, a revelation point moment for Putin when he thought that the country had fully controlled. All of a sudden rejected Lukashenko, rejected authoritarianism, and also wanted to aspire for those values, universal values that Putin criticizes that we attribute to Europe and the West. And I think he really, once again understood that he's losing countries in his so-called neo-broad, and therefore he has to take further action. And that's, I think, what we're seeing today in Ukraine. And therefore, I believe that the war will continue for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I felt for a long time that this is going to be a long war. Of course, some people in Ukraine fear this could be the endless war. And possibly having suffered a reversal in Moldova just a couple of weeks ago, the incentive is even greater to sort of keep going in Ukraine. Katia, we have a question from Henrik Zeip from Equinor, who says, mustn't Putin be kicking himself for not taking Trump's offer while it was on the table? And he would arguably have been where Netanyahu is now, largely able to dictate the peace. Well, Henrik, I think it's hard to it's hard to disagree with that. But Putin really does seem to be motivated by something bigger. And I can't help feeling that he believes after his interactions with President Trump, and he referred to Trump in the Valdai dialogue as a comfortable interlocutor, somebody who listens and hears what's being said. So that he somehow feels that there is some sort of common interest here between the new administration in the US and Russia when it comes to Europe. The sort of common view, and there's some possibility of restoring what the Russian side calls historical Europe. So we've got a question from Bob Seeley. He's a former Conservative Member of Parliament in the UK, who says, how would you assess Putin's appearances at Valdai over time? Who is Valdai aimed at now, if not the West? Is it the developing world? Katia, I don't know if you feel able to take that on. I mean, my sense is that Putin's always felt very comfortable in the Valdai format. It's a place where he gets, the curated questions. He's on subjects that he knows inside out, and he loves talking about, foreign policy and strategy and things. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. I think he's one of those dictators, populist leaders who can talk for hours, and they, unlike other leaders, political leaders, do not get exhausted. And I think they really strive on this energy. And it's, one achievement that I think we can attribute to Putin, that he spoke for 4 hours. And yeah, I think he derived more energy and more enthusiasm from speaking. So I think he's always indeed looked very comfortable in such public forum. Again, there isn't anyone who is asking him difficult questions. All those people who are there, they've been cleared. There is no one who can pose a question that could upset him, or that he could potentially think how to answer. Again, my parallel comes here with interview that was done with Alexander Lukashenko by BBC, by Stephen Rosberg not so long ago, when he asked Lukashenko very direct questions about, if you're so popular, then why did so many people come to the streets? Why do you keep people in prison? And Lukashenko became very angry and lost, confused. Because this is not the questions that these leaders face. They don't know how to answer them. And I think we would have seen different Putin had, direct and open questions been able to be put forward to him. I don't think that, apart from the international audience, I would not say that Putin has much changed in his appearance at Valdai meetings.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question and a comment from James Nixie, who until recently was the head of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. James, it's nice you're with us. And he reminds us that he was a veteran of the 2004 Valdai meeting, and I think I've even seen there's a photograph of James even shaking hands with Putin at the time. He says, not an original question, but what do you both think are the indicators we should be looking for, which show that this is all getting too much for Putin in Russia? Well, that's a big question. James, I mean, I think we would have to look for a combination, I think, of dissatisfaction within the elites. I think increasing economic problems, or at least disruption, perhaps created by the Ukrainian side. And I think it's very interesting how Ukraine is developing this ability now to attack the part of the oil industry. I mean, not just oil refineries, but even export terminals. And there's a remarkable piece written by somebody many of us know, Ukraine's Minister of Defense from 2019 to 2020, Andriy Zagaryanyuk. He published an article recently outlining long-term Ukrainian strategy of what he calls strategic neutralization of Russia's objectives. and that his assumption is the war won't just simply won't end, but Ukraine can deploy the advantages it has to contain Russian pressure at a significantly lower cost than it's doing so at present. And the goal will be not to defeat Russia as such, but to make the pursuit of its goals futile. So I think that sort of strategy is going to involve much more perhaps asymmetric warfare, and then creating sort of increasing problems within Russia itself, and increasing awareness, I think, in society of the futility of this war. I mean, Russian friends tell me that taking flying out of Moscow these days is you just don't know how long you're going to be delayed for because of drone activity and the air defenses, etc. So there's probably those are the areas I think I would be looking at. Katia, I wanted to come back to you actually and ask you about the role of Lukashenko in this dialogue between the United States and Russia, because I find that something truly remarkable that the US administration thought that Lukashenko might be of value here. And it's just surely wonderful news for him to, again, sort of come out of international isolation and be seen to be this key figure, somebody who supposedly gave the American side an indication of, Putin's genuine thinking. What has Lukashenko actually got out of this, do you think?
Well, I think Lukashenko, first of all, got out of that legitimacy, international, first of all, but also domestic, as he could portray the visit of General Keith Kellogg, for example, to Minsk, or John Cole, the presidential envoy, as recognition of his presidency. And that's something that for people like him, like Putin, those dictators who have been in power for a very long time, they actually, when people reject them, in case of Lukashenko, for example, that's very painful. I think for his personal ego, that was important. It was important to show to the domestic public that after 5 years of the stolen election, the West is prepared to start a new chapter with Lukashenko. Even if that's not the case, even if we don't see much happening from the side of the European Union or European leaders, nonetheless, Lukashenko can give this that spin. And I think we have also have two very direct consequences and implications of that visit. Well, first of all, we see sanctions having been lifted of the national air company, Valdai. Again, it's slightly controversial because it seems that Lukashenko's own aircraft have remained under sanctions, and there have been certain restrictions made in the regime that, for example, Valdai can't fly to countries like Russia. However, of course, where does Belarusian aircraft fly today? Because they are banned from Europe, they are banned from the West. So there has been a tremendous increase of flights to Russia. And of course, Valdai planes do go to Russia. So it's controversial how much impact the lifting of the sanctions have had on Belarus. And the second point is the official reopening of the embassy in Minsk and potential return of the American ambassador. Again, that has not happened yet, but it has been announced that it would be coming within the next few weeks. So I think it will be very important to observe to what would be happening and what further signs of legitimacy and Western interactions with Lukashenko we will see. And I would like to finish that by saying that it's it's surprising, yes, that the US thinks that they can perhaps approach Putin through Lukashenko, but Lukashenko has always been very clever at using this card. And after all, he is Putin's probably closest allies. He does talk to him. He does go to Russia every month. He talks to him over the phone and whatever game he's playing. But there is certainly a way for the US to hear more insights from Lukashenko on how to best approach Putin.
Thank you. We're going to have to sort of finish up fairly soon. We started a couple of minutes late, so I'm going to just carry on for a few minutes. Grateful to Alexander Goltz for a comment. He says a year ago, Putin insisted that European countries are fully subordinated to the United States. And now he's sure that the Europeans are spoiling the good US approach to resolving this conflict. So the question is to what extent we should believe that we have the opportunity to listen to Putin's real views. I take that point, Sasha. Thank you for that. Finally, Laura Brady asks, does Putin's recent admission of Russian responsibility for the 25th of December Azeri Airlines air crash indicate weakness? Now, that's a very interesting question about relations with Azerbaijan, because Russia has obviously suffered a real setback in the South Caucasus recently. Any thoughts, Katia, on that, on the question of Putin, I think, trying to curry some favor here with Baku?
Well, we will see. I think we'll soon. We've got the information very recently that Putin might meet with President Aliyev in Tajikistan. We will see what will come out. I personally do not know what to expect, but we shall see. And we certainly have analysts who follow this question very closely, and we might have a commentary coming up with that quite soon on our website.
That's a good teaser. But Laura, I think that is an important question. It seems to me that Moscow is going to be very anxious to try to rebuild relations with Baku and to kind of see off this, or at least reduce some of this influence from Turkey, which is effectively displacing Russia as an actor to some extent in the South Caucasus. We are out of time, so I'm going to stop there. Katia, I want to thank you for joining us at extremely short notice and sharing your wisdom. Thank you very much to our audience. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. We hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Thank you, Katia.
Thank you. Thank you, John.